All right, welcome everybody. For those who are joining us on LinkedIn and YouTube, and if anybody joining us live in studio here, welcome. All right, so for anyone who doesn't know us yet, if this is your first time joining, my name is Mike Grimberg, CEO of Proofpoint Marketing. I've got Aaron Weeks, who is our Senior Performance Marketing Manager, and John Peel, who's our Marketing Ops and Analytics Lead. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello.
And we are going to be chatting about some fun stuff today. So we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're actually going to share a couple of slides. This is not going to be death by PowerPoint, I promise. But we want to get really tactical into an example around data. And what I want to do is set the stage a little bit here around what we're going to be talking about. So, oftentimes we are, as marketers, we're going to be tasked with reporting to executive teams, to boards, et cetera. And there's always this question around, okay, well, which KPI should I be reporting on, and what should the dashboard look like, and all that kind of fun stuff. And those are all great questions, and they're valuable, and we can get into that if we want to. And we probably will get into some of those details today too, so stay tuned for that. But there are a number of situations where it's really not as simple as just throwing up a couple of KPIs and that's it. For example, let's say you are launching a brand new initiative, right? Over the first month or two, any KPIs are going to have any sort of volume are mostly going to be vanity metrics, and they're not going to tell you a full story, right? So you need to look at patterns of content consumption and things like that and be able to connect the dots. And that's more of a manual process, pulling data from various sources and to be able to tell a story, right? Which is, again, the topic of what we're talking about today. Because that story is what's going to tell you, is this thing, whatever it is, working or not working? Another thing to think about is, not everybody is a SaaS marketer. Okay. And the reason why that's important is in most SaaS organizations, there's a lot of data in terms of, and it comes in pretty quickly, especially if it's, PLG, lower per user costs, things like that. You're going to have a lot of data pretty quickly. But in most other B2B instances, take niche consulting groups that are selling, multi-million-dollar, multi-year consulting engagements, or take manufacturing where you're, selling large capital expenditure machinery for, a couple $1 million a pop. All sorts of other examples like that. Your volume is going to be so low before you can get to things like LTV and whatnot, that you really need to dig into engagement data and content consumption data to really see what's working and what's not, and be able to connect the dots. So that's what we're gonna do. Is, I shouldn't say we, really, it's gonna be Aaron and John are gonna walk you through an example here of how we've done this. We're gonna show one client example. We'll maybe talk through some others, and to really paint a picture of how can you do this. Because again, there are plenty of situations where just looking at KPIs are not going to do enough, right? KPIs are not going to tell you all the details of who's engaging, how are they engaging, why are they engaging, that kind of stuff. Those are pieces you have to kind of pull together to connect the dots and tell a story. So with that, I'm mostly going to be a fly in the wall. I get to interview you too. This is going to be fun. I'm going to kick it over to Aaron and John and let you all walk through an example, and then we'll open it up for questions like we usually do.
Love it. So I am going to bring up a slide deck, but like we said, it's not going to be a PowerPoint presentation. I just want to use this to kind of frame our conversations. And if you have questions as John and I are going, let's answer them on the fly. So that's what I'm presenting right now. Perfect. So first question for every marketer. Can you see the screen? Is it coming up? Okay. Perfect. So why I want to start with this one is, and why I love this topic is, not every marketer is in SaaS, right? Mike kind of talked about it. As far as data and what's available to us, it's going to be different in different verticals and different industries. But that doesn't mean we can't really build that storytelling and that narrative to help us understand where to go, what we did, and why we should do more of it. This is important to look at this one here, and I'll kind of let John speak in a second. What we need to do is build a narrative over time. We need a line on time here. Is this chart here is kind of showing brand traffic over time. We know what we're doing from a marketing activity. We know that we have a podcast going. We know that we're distributing ads. We know that we're improving content. I think this is the first place that you're going to really see that outcome of, again, this case study that we're going to build and talk through. So the point I really want to articulate is, again, we started that podcast and distributing ads around September. Well, it took about 3 to 4 months to really see that lift. And again, as we talk through this, we're really going to kind of break down time and what to do with it. John, do you want to kind of throw anything out on this slide before I go forward?
Yeah, one of the main callouts for this slide is looking at those demand signals. So we're doing all this work to generate demand, but how can we see if that demand is producing any kind of results, like early indicator results? And brand traffic is one of those signals that lets us know that people are actively searching the brand out. They're not just coming in through an ad, but something triggered them to want to search out the brand, the company. And so this is a great signal that we are in fact generating demand.
Yeah, and why again, John and I put this together because we love it too, is we understand like not everyone's going to have a robust CRM. When we're working with a client, again, in industrial, manufacturing, again, professional services, we're trying to help us understand that analysis now, knowing that the outcome when we go forward is we do want to report revenue. We want to report marketing source attribution, but we can't do that yet. We got to build the story in the case now. So I'm going to move on from this slide. But you could gate the podcast. You could, yeah. Okay, so another area.
I have seen people running gated podcast episode ads, which I think is completely just stupid. They're running lives. I've seen people running lead gen LinkedIn ads that gate access to a podcast episode that you can, in theory, get for free. I don't know. Anyway.
Love it. And again, with
it's funny. It's funny, but not.
Yeah. More or less, it's like what we're trying to do is help our customers and people in our industry understand like what to do more of. And maybe it is gating. I think the confusion is if you can't do this storytelling, this narrative analysis of the data, it's really even hard to make that case. So another place we really want to look at, John and I, as we build this out, is where we're going to feel this is, are people, the right people, visiting the right pages on the website? So again, you can see in September, that's where we kind of launched our podcast. We launched our paid media to get that content from the right people. Again, we're seeing some lift there. We may not see them always being attributed to those pages. We may not see them coming in the CRM, but we're seeing traffic lift. And we know that we did this marketing activity for this particular traffic in this time period. That's where we're going to see it. John, any comments on this one?
Yeah, like you said, we're not always going to see like leads come in or people submit request more information forms right off the bat. With these high value deals, we can see like 6 months or like 3 months to 6 months before someone actually submits information and wants to learn more, talk to someone. So during that time, we want to see, again, are there early indicators that are showing a lift in demand? So these kind of correlations help us understand that, and we can gain some insights as to launch this podcast, are we starting to see an uptick? So it's looking at those correlations and seeing if there's a positive correlation to that.
Definitely. And those correlations are going to be our friends because, again, you have all this alignment conversation to even get the podcast off the ground with either leadership or your internal team. And what we're really trying to build here is, again, to give us that feeling and confidence, those positive signals we're going the right direction, because we know those conversations are going to happen at a later point. We know people are going to come into the CRM at a later point. The job buying cycle is very long, right? So again, we're trying to look at it now and get that feel for it. Okay, I'm going to go. One other point I want to make is, I think why you sort of need this analysis, this kind of high level view over time, is because what we're going to get into next is like the individual signals that maybe we see day in and day out. But when we're reporting to maybe leadership or doing some internal marketing to others that maybe are not like John and I, who are in the systems, in the data every day, looking at ads every day, we really need to show that trajectory over time. I think these are great. And John, you put these together. I think they're awesome. But they're really going to be helpful to kind of get us here. Take a quick sip and I'll kind of elaborate.
Yeah, well, he's taking a sip. One phrase I like to use is numbers are great, but the people behind the numbers are even greater. So understanding who's coming to the website, who's engaging with the ads is in some sense even more important than the actual volume of people coming to the website. And so that's what Aaron's going to get into now.
Yeah, great segue. The chemistry here is perfect, John. So I think what's important with those two slides again is it took about 3 to 4 months for us to observe that traffic lift of getting that brand traffic or getting the right people to the right pages. Well, as we're doing that process over time, we can start to see these positive signals about the right people, the right relationships. This kind of gets into more of the what we're actually doing on paid media, what we're analyzing over time, and like the documentation and what we're taking. So I'm going to walk us through probably about 4 or 5 slides, but it's really to articulate the point as I have it here is we're doing a marketing activity. We have a podcast. We're going to distribute the video ads. Who are the people reacting to this activity? That's important to us as a qualitative signal now, because again, may take 3 to 4 months for me to see the traffic lift, may take another month or 2 for me to see someone in the CRM. So we need these inputs now to make sure we're going the right positive direction. So this first one is, again, just kind of highlighting, here's some ads that we've actually distributed. And I'm getting some qualitative feedback of here's actual people that engage with the ad or reacted to the ad. I can look at their job title. I can look at kind of what company they are. The firmographic fit. Are these the right people when I say that? That's kind of what we're trying to build as we continue this process. Again, we're just throwing you more examples of the same thing here. What about different ads? You know, we like to test our narrative. We like to test our messaging. Same concept. I may not know the messaging is going to really bring someone in pipeline until a couple months later, but I can look at these qualitative signals now and understand, again, are these the right people reacting to my narrative? Is this the right narrative? Does it resonate? Does it compel? We start to build that analysis of those individuals. There's just another example there. I'm going to get to another slide here. Okay. This is kind of the high level view of like looking at this all in action here is I know from a qualitative signal that I'm seeing the right people at the right time. I know that certain ads are getting in front of certain companies, certain industries, such as this example. I'm doing other activity as far as maybe improving landing pages to make sure that conversation touch point is much more intuitive, reduces friction in the buying process. Then great, what do I see? About 3 months later, we have someone that fits our job title. They have firmographic fit. And I can work backwards and see that they looked at our podcast ads. They reacted to our narrative ads. Awesome. That's the right relationship. I saw them come in the funnel. That's going to give us so much confidence on what we're doing and how we can scale this and how we can build this. I'm going to stop here. John, you got anything you want to add here?
No, that's great. Keep going.
I'll throw out something here real quick, which is the important thing here again is, and again, for this client, there's not a lot of opportunity volume because again, these are large value, long-term engagements. And in general, their sales cycle is also extremely long too. So add that on top of it. So in these situations, this type of information is absolutely critical, because now we can say, okay, we were running several different types of ads. We can see, well, which ones are they engaging with? And that can then drive us to make decisions around, well, what are we going to do next? What types of things are we going to scale? Which types of things are we not going to scale, right? In this case, we can see who this person is. And then over time, maybe a couple more come through and we can see, all right, are there similarities in job titles with, let's just say, with what they're responding to, right? So it's a lot of this kind of qualitative type information that allows you to connect these dots and say, okay, here's how I can scale this moving forward.
Yeah, and I think scale is important here when we're analyzing this, because we're doing a lot, right? We're messing with the narrative, we're distributing that, we're doing a podcast, almost a live event, we're updating content on the website. Like, this packages it together to help us kind of understand where we need to go and keep going. So, what I took out of this is, when this happened, is I was doing a lot of narrative testing. I was trying to figure out what narrative stuck. It's helpful for me to actually see a live person come in the funnel from that narrative and these podcasts, so I can start to kind of equip our team with, hey, I think this narrative really resonates. I can see the data, I can see the numbers, but I have that qualitative confidence too, that, man, this right person, they were really reacting to this type of narrative. Maybe we should do an iteration. Maybe we should double down. Maybe we should commit to it. I think that's okay. So just 2 more slides. Again, maybe you can't get here first, right? You don't have anyone in funnel. We have long buying cycle. Why I like LinkedIn so much is you get some of this kind of company and demographic data baked into their platform. So why I'm waiting for somebody to come in, and this is another example of someone coming in, is I can at least see like what companies. If I'm running an ABM list, that's important to me. Maybe again, if I'm just trying to really target my ICP, also very important to me to understand how much of my narrative got to these companies. And vice versa. Let's see. Yeah, this is another company target list, but same concept is why LinkedIn is perfect for kind of this analysis and this narrative is I don't have to wait for someone to get in funnel. I can get into these qualitative insights now. I can see where my narrative, my podcast has, my content I'm distributing, who is it hitting, and then we can start to kind of bake and build some action into that. So I think those are my last 2 slides. Go ahead.
Yeah. Seeing the companies that are viewing the ads on LinkedIn, you can also include an IP de-anonymizer on your website to see what companies are coming to the website. And it's somewhat difficult to operationalize the two, but you can anecdotally just look at the list of companies that are coming to the website, see if that list matches up with the companies that are viewing your ads on LinkedIn. That's another great positive signal that people are consuming your content on LinkedIn. They might not click, so you're not going to see a direct attribution from LinkedIn, but you're going to see them pop up on your website as a de-anonymizer, like ClickBit, I think is one of them. Leadfeeder, like those kind of tools can give you those kind of insights.
That's a great point, John. And I think also I want to tell people is when you don't have that option, here's what I do. Is I like generally just put people in a spreadsheet of who's seeing my ad over time. So if I don't have that capability to maybe have that tool as overhead, it's like I can start using that spreadsheet to kind of have that similar conversation. Like these are the exact people over time, they're reacting in these ads. It shows some intent there, may not be the same intent that John is talking about, but it'll kind of help us also with our analysis.
Yeah, and a lot of that data too, you can in theory pull out of the LinkedIn Ads API too. If you're willing to get a little more technical, you can get a lot of that information manually, not manually per se, but pull that out. The other thing I throw out there too is, as you're doing this also becomes a great way to integrate with your sales team and with your outbound motion, because now you can say, hey, it looks like, here's a list of companies that are really, really engaged right now. Right. And you can, for that matter, you can even get more granular. You can say, here's a list of companies that are really engaged, not just on our educational content, they're engaged in our strategic narrative stuff, which means the concept of what we offer, in this case, it's consulting services. In another situation, it might be a product, whatever, it's resonating. Let's make sure we're reaching out. And on top of that, now you can start integrating with, all right, well, it looks like they're, whatever, they watched, these 2 podcast episodes. Now we can reference content from those podcast episodes in our outreach. So there's this story that you can build by connecting all these points, allows you to then significantly improve and personalize any outreach that your sales team is going to do. You can feed this to your team. So, and again, this, as Aaron was saying, this can be done without a robust CRM. Like, you can track some of this stuff in a spreadsheet. You can deliver whatever on a monthly or a biweekly or whatever makes sense basis to your sales team. Hey, here's whatever the criteria you decide upon. Here are the top engaged companies, and maybe even people within those companies, depending on how long the ads have been running and how much engagement there is, and what they're engaging with. So you may want to consider referencing these 3 talking points. There you go.
Yeah, I think another thought, let me kind of go back to the original slide, is to the robust CRM comment, is I always like to encourage people that the best time to start is now. We wouldn't be able to build this analysis unless we got the program going. And I think working with other marketers, like, I know that's probably one of the challenges too, as you're trying to build this paid media case study, is can we actually get off the ground? Can we get it distributed? I think what's vitally important is you won't get any of those qualitative insights. You won't get this kind of long narrative storytelling unless you really kind of align on that and push that. And we've had some other conversations, such as progress over perfection and kind of like how you can test your narrative. But I would really offer that, like, if you can start today, I think that's going to be a huge advantage for you.
Yeah, one thing I'll talk on is that there are multiple audiences for this kind of storytelling, and the story kind of adjusts based on who you're talking to. So when you're talking to fellow marketers, maybe you get into the weeds a little bit about those vanity metrics of click-through rates and how can we improve certain things by just tweaking headlines, things like that. Marketers, you can get in the weeds with that. But when you're talking to executives, that's when you want to get into more of the narrative, qualitative insights that address not just a marketing objective, but tying it into business objectives. That the reason why we're doing this is to achieve this business objective, and we are achieving that through connecting with the right people, engaging with the right communities. We're starting conversations in the comment section. Like, those are the kind of insights and stories that you can tell to help the leadership understand that the value of this demand gen, where you're not seeing immediate like revenue, but you're building up to that over time. And then lastly, there's an internal conversation that needs to happen as well, where you are using these insights and not just looking at KPIs, but looking at like trends and really diving into the data to optimize your messaging, optimize the targeting. So you're not just like looking at a sea of numbers and saying, oh, this month we were up by 10%. Like, so what? What does that mean? That's where you can like really dive into it and like tell a story to yourself in a way to really move the needle.
Yeah, that's a great point, John. I'll riff on that one a little bit too, because I think, again, what we feel is like the relationships matter. So as we talk about data that way, it kind of really takes us out of like thinking about the relationships and learning about them. So that's why I like this kind of case study. That's why I do things like putting people in the spreadsheet. So it helps us like frame and center around relationships. And as we're talking about leadership, we can use those first 2 slides to show our trajectory and progress, but we can really go down to those quality positive signals to be like, these are the relationships you want to have, right? Let's talk about them, because I think those are the kind of key learnings that can really like drive all of us and kind of give us that like energy too. Because sometimes the data itself, as a performance marketer, I'm like, this doesn't really engage me, but seeing someone like react to my ad and actually like leaving a comment or post, kind of what you're saying, John, it's like, whew, that's like really gives me some energy and some confidence in what we're doing.
Definitely.
So, Aaron, maybe, and John, talk a little bit about what we can do with this data once we've got it, right? So, for example, can we use this to optimize the type of interviews we're doing in a podcast, as an example, or what types of decisions are we making once we have these story points connected, if you will?
Definitely, I'll take the first stab. So I think one is we'd probably encourage you to kind of test your messaging and narrative. And through this kind of case study, you'll be able to see early on what's resonating. So therefore, you can take that and then apply it to other things you're doing. So again, for this example, we've applied it to our outreach emails. We've applied it to new ads on the podcast front, right? Is we took the narrative, now we kind of start to sprinkle in that messaging and language on the podcast ads we distribute. So again, that's probably number one, is you can learn most about your messaging and then apply it. I think number two is, again, the activation and outreach component is, it's helpful if you have a podcast or live event like this to do it, but you can start to see those people, right? It's like, we want to build relationships as fast as we can. Let's go invite them on. The data is going to kind of show us they're reacting to it. Then we'll get that qualitative positive signal of them actually reacting, commenting, sharing. Like, that's enough intent as you need to just invite them to come on and then get them in that relationship start to build. What do you think, John?
Yeah, that's spot on. Yeah, it's about building relationships. And so understanding how the ads or other content that you're distributing is helping to build that relationship. It starts with building an affinity with your brand. And so seeing those kind of affinity signals of engagement and commenting, basically giving someone giving their seal of approval, like, yeah, I agree with that. What you're saying resonates. And then seeing that transition into conversations. That's one thing that is important, that affinity on its own doesn't necessarily lead to conversation. So there's a bit of an activation step in there, which Aaron talked about, of taking these insights and then inviting people to a podcast or reaching out to them proactively to see, like, what was it about that post that resonated? Kind of start a non-sales conversation that could lead into a sale. Mike, you kind of do this. So how do you do this for Proofpoint?
I mean, so the other thing it does is it allows you to validate some of your like self-reported attribution, for example, right? So if somebody says, heard about you on a podcast, let's just say. But what you might be seeing is, well, yeah, they're saying podcast, but what they likely mean is they've been seeing the ad, like the clips from the podcast on LinkedIn, as an example. And you might even know specifically which ones, right? So obviously it depends on the volume of data you have and things like that, but you could start piecing those things together and understanding what is actually driving the affinity that's converting to conversations, that's then converting to relationships. And again, especially this is really, really, really useful in a business like ours, or really, I would say, any other lower volume type business where you're not driving, hundreds or thousands of MQLs or SQLs or whatever acronym you want to use on a weekly or monthly basis, right? It's where it's maybe single digits or 10, 20 kind of thing, where that volume is low enough where it's hard to make sort of statistically significant decisions quickly. But connecting those dots gives you anecdotal data on, all right, this is how my relationships are being built. I can double down here. on this type of podcast interview or this type of live event or this type of ad messaging, etc. And we, again, that's a lot of the stuff that we do. Right? So we'll look at, engagement on these events. As we're starting to run ads, we'll be looking at which ones are getting engagement and by who, what types of firmographic data, like pretty much as what Aaron and John just shared for a client of ours. We do all that same stuff. And then based on that, we make decisions on, again, which type of content to put out and which types of formats work best. Is like, over time we can start looking at, does the Q&A format that we're about to go into here, does that work? Do people take advantage of it? If so, that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Aaron, you want to talk about why we don't just use attribution data? Like why go through all these steps of looking at the people and the conversations? Why not just look to see who's coming from LinkedIn and see who's filling out the form that's attributed to LinkedIn?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll give my best shot, and you can add in, John, here is, I think as attribution is changing over time is, one, most of your attribution in your CRM, let's say HubSpot, for example, is probably going to be captured from Google Ads. So most of the time, you're going to see CPC as like the main source attribution. Even though we doing a podcast, we're distributing podcast ads, we're distributing narrative, a lot of times it's just going to be attributed to that channel. So that's really going to kind of focus you in on, okay, I need to do more Google Ads. I need to up my PPC budget. I need to scale that. But what we know is we put all our time, energy, and effort into this live event, distributing the content, outreach. So I think attribution it's good. Like it should be part of your tool set. But if you obsess over attribution, you may miss obsessing over the other things, like obsessing over your customer, obsessing over the relationship, obsessing over like making the podcast better. So that's kind of my take on it. And then again, I think like the how did you hear about us is helpful, but it depends on the industry. But like, let's say manufacturing, more often than not, you're probably going to get someone that says internet or, Google. So the how did you hear about us only really takes us so far. In the attribution, the CRM, again, may say CPC or, Google Ads, however it's tagged. But again, I know that I did a live event. I know that I'm distributing narrative ads. I'm doing all this other activity. So that's kind of where I'll take the attribution conversation, John, and you kind of sprinkle in your thoughts.
Yeah. There's kind of two different channels. There's the demand generation channels and the demand capture channels. Attribution is great for those demand capture channels. So paid search, branded search, like direct ads that have a clear call to action to request a demo or reach out. But for more of those narrative ads that you're trying to tell a story with who the brand is, what's the pain point that the brand is addressing, there's not like a clear call to action of reach out to us. It's more about, again, building that affinity. And so it's kind of hard to get a direct attribution back to those campaigns and channels. So that's why this exercise is really important, to demonstrate the value of those channels in creating that demand that we'll capture later down the road. The other thing with the types of clients that we work with is that they're generally pretty sales heavy, in that the salesperson is going out and proactively reaching out to the market, their target accounts. So someone's not filling out a form. A salesperson is going out and talking to people at live events. They're calling them up. They've already built that relationship, and the ads are kind of just nurturing that relationship along. So there's not like a conversion point on the website. The conversion point happens offline through the salesperson's conversation. So again, that's really difficult to be able to attribute it unless the salesperson is like, what is every single touch point you've ever had with our brand? You're not going to get that. So it's these anecdotal signals that help us gauge the impact that marketing is having.
Yeah, I think
one thing
go ahead, Mike.
I was going to add a couple of things. Aaron, kind of to something you just said earlier around, well, depending on the industry, a lot of people just put in internet or Google or whatnot. We definitely do see that in certain industries, like take ag tech, for example. Even that still might be a SaaS product, but we do get that a lot in this self-reported attribution. However, the flip side of that coin, though, is you need to be doing something memorable for people to put in something other than internet or Google. Right. But what I mean by memorable, I don't necessarily mean like it's got to be hilarious or entertaining, although that does work, works well. But it doesn't have to be that, right? It could be something really valuable and educational. It could be something really touching if it's like a ESG type thing or whatever. So there's a lot of ways you can do memorable, but unless you're doing something memorable, your self-reported attribution likely won't tell you much more. It won't tell you much more than what your regular attribution is telling you often, for that matter. So there's sort of two sides to that coin where you need to do something that's actually memorable, but also I think temper expectations even then, because again, just people are just used to kind of bypassing that. Like, yeah, whatever, internet, Google, like they don't care. Right. And I think it's more prevalent in some industries than others.
I think that's a great point, Mike. It reminded me that you and Joseph just did one about emotional messaging. I think that's another area where it's, let's say something unique with our own POV and also emotional, and you're probably going to get a different response than that. How did you hear about us? One comment I did want to make about attribution that when John was talking kind of reminded me of it is there's some companies that may not be able to have direct attribution. For instance, you may have a distributor network and you may not be able to track that time attribution that we all talk about we want to have. That doesn't mean you can't do this process. And I think that's why I love it so much in this narrative storytelling we're doing with the data, because you can bypass that, right? Is all you need to do is, again, find the right relationships, look in the data of what the right relationships are, activate them, look for those qualitative signals. You may not have that perfect attribution. And that's kind of why we like this process better. Because again, you can still get better every time. And I think that's what's important.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a very important point. There's a reason why most large companies do MDF funds, right? Market development funds. So if anybody hasn't worked with a channel partner program or something like that, whatever, all the big tech companies have it, right? Microsoft does it, Intel does it, et cetera. I mean, that's, it's pretty much, and a lot of it is they're trying to get you to slap their logo, on your ads and things like that. And they're funding some of that, but it's more than just that, right? I just interviewed somebody who was a marketing director from a cybersecurity firm. They happen to be a reseller of a bunch of technologies. And one of the things they've done is they're leveraging MDF funds from a bunch of these companies to fund their podcast, right? To fund their podcast, and part of that's gone to funding like the studio they created and all this kind of stuff, right? So I'm kind of going on a bit of a tangent, but it's very valuable to do it in that exact instance, Aaron, like you said, because your job at that point is to get the right audience, get in front of the right audience, even if you're not selling them to them directly, because that allows you to see, well, are they consuming this content? Are they engaging with it? Whatever. Let's assume we work with a manufacturer in the construction space, construction materials. And they sell all through distributors and mostly through distributors. If we can gauge whether the right types of people are engaging with the ads, if we can see are they asking questions, are they sharing, are they doing things like that, that allows us to feel comfortable that, yep, they are likely going to ask for that product when they go to their distributor next time, or they're more likely to, And then from there, it's a correlation game.
I think one question I have for the group, and this is kind of a personal anecdote to marketing for me, is like, I'm a marketer that was born and raised in attribution. Like, I don't really know a world that doesn't have that. And why I'm excited about these activities is because I know in the past, it's like you ran ads on radio, you ran ads on commercial, and like you had to correlate the data, like you had to. So I don't know, Mike or Johnny, you want to have any comments about that? But it's almost like we're trying to get back to that.
I definitely see that. It's a return to the basics of marketing, things that I learned in Marketing 101 in college. Back before there was Google and click-based attribution, they looked at the correlated data. We ran this ad in this market. Did we see an uptick in sales in that market? B2B, it's a little bit of a different play. But again, it's still just looking at correlations between launching programs and seeing the impact that those programs have in other signals. So website traffic, anecdotally from salespeople, are salespeople saying that they have better conversations with their prospects or people that they're talking to. One great positive signal is if your CEO goes to a event and people are like, "Oh, I've seen you on LinkedIn." Like that, that's a great, like, that conversation has already started before they talk to each other, because that person knows what the company stands for, where they're coming from. So those kind of anecdotal tidbits help inform that the work that marketing is doing is working.
Yeah, I said I wasn't gonna talk a ton, but it might be worthwhile to kind of walk through the history of attribution a little bit for people. I'm gonna age myself just slightly here. So, I mean, I've been doing this for close to 20 years at this point. So I started before attribution was even a thing. Analytics was, web analytics was still pretty new and all that kind of stuff. So back between, say, like 2012 and 2015, there was a bit of a battle going between marketing mix modeling tools and attribution tools. For whatever reason, attribution went out. I'm still not sure why, to be honest. And everybody started, I think I know why. It's the marketing. It's easier to understand, etc. Because once you get into marketing mix modeling, you're doing it's econometrics and all this kind of stuff. Like the average person just can't grasp it. I barely understand it. Let's be honest. So at some point, everything shifted from a technology perspective, or a lot of it shifted to attribution as we know it today. But interestingly, if you look at most enterprise organizations, they have been investing in media mix modeling platforms like this entire time. You just don't hear about it a lot because that's like your Fortune 100s, because these tools are expensive, they're complicated, all this kind of stuff. And media mix modeling is a lot of, John, kind of what you were talking about. And I think a lot of people in the B2B space can implement a lot of these same types of measurement tests, if you will, that are so common in retail and B2C, for example. And again, I've got a lot of that background. So like we'd used to go, all right, let's look at same store sales by region and then do light dark testing in certain markets and say, okay, we're gonna run ads in this market, but not in these others. Look at same store sales and compare. Now you've got your control and whatever. You can, in theory, do the same thing with B2B. It's a little bit more complicated, but if you got your list of target accounts, you can split them out by region. Let's just say run ads in a specific region, or you can even run ads to a specific set of accounts and not others. Now, there are opportunity costs to doing this, right? Your opportunity cost to having a control means you're not influencing that control group. So what are you potentially missing out on from a sales perspective, right? That's always been, I would say, the knock on real statistical media mix modeling. You have to have a control, and that control has a pretty significant opportunity cost to it. And a lot of people, and not to mention it's really complicated too and whatnot to really do it completely randomly if it's not by region or something like that. So, and I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but I think it's worthwhile mentioning that because, again, if anyone's working in retail, they know this. Most B2B people don't because they've never had to deal with it.
No, thanks for sharing that. I think, again, what we want to get across is there's different ways to do this. And I think with attribution is we're kind of learning that works in some scenarios, but maybe there's a better way. And again, with this kind of narrative data storytelling and putting all the qualitative pieces together, that's what we're trying to get some key learnings, see the right people, right relationships, and hopefully take that back to our marketing program and just improve it day by day.
Yeah, definitely. The numbers aren't bad. So it is important to show the numbers, show the trends, but it's also important to explain the story behind those numbers. Why did we see an uplift in brand traffic? What's driving the success? Or if we're not seeing success, what have we learned from it? And telling those stories is more impactful than just showing a sea of numbers in a dashboard of vanity metrics that aren't really going to assist in making data-driven decisions. So that's the key takeaway here is understanding the people and the stories behind the numbers that you're presenting.
All right, so I don't know if I think we have maybe a couple people that are still around. If anybody has a question that you'd like to talk through live, or if you just want to ask us a question, pop it in the chat. Otherwise, if you want to talk about things live, you can join us live if you'd like, and we can get you to come on and chat for a bit. I'll leave this up here for a little while in case anybody wants to join. Aaron and John, one of the other things to maybe worthwhile talking about is kind of micro versus macro decision making based on this data. So, and how often we can make optimizations based on this type of data.
Yeah, I'll take this first, John, and then you can come in. And I think you did kind of mention this earlier, but it's like we're not using this data to decide headline versus headline, color of ad versus color ad. What we're trying to use this data and this storytelling to kind of have confidence and commit to kind of our major pillars of the strategy, right? We're putting the podcast together. That's a lot of time, energy, and effort from everyone. We're going to distribute it. We're going to learn from it. We're going to see what people come in and then hopefully make that decision as we're waiting for the rest of the data down the line of like, should we put more energy, effort, and time into this? Like that's kind of the macro decisions. Other macro decisions, specifically like with the podcast, we're kind of talking about this is I'm going to get some of this reactions from the people seeing what episodes they react to. And maybe there's more engagement for a point of view episode where, again, the client kind of talks about their unique position on a topic. Or maybe there's more engagement on inviting guests on. And a lot of the time we do see that. That one's pretty straightforward. But again, maybe that gives us the confidence of we really need to put some more energy to get some guests on because it brings our audience, more people engage with the data on the feed as we're seeing. And we're seeing that qualitative assessment on those individuals reacting to those guest episodes. So I'll give that example. John, if you want to kind of take it a different way.
No, yeah, that's exactly what I would say is, yeah, you don't want to make too drastic of changes based off of a very small data set. So you do want to have some time and to build up a good amount of data of like engagement data of who's engaging with the content and whatnot. And then once you have that, yeah, making some strategic decisions off of that. Is the message resonating? Yeah, could we be saying this in a different way? Yeah, so Aaron, you explained it really well. The main point I want to make is just that you don't want to do just like a week's worth of data and use that as the guidepost for everything else you do. Give it time, iterate over time. Aaron, I think you said something about like progress over perfection. Like that's, you want to be iterating off of the data that you're learning from.
Yeah, I think another common example you'll see with this kind of storytelling and building is, as we encourage people, you should test your messaging before it's too late. I think that's one of the macro decisions you can make is you did customer interviews, you're distributing a narrative through LinkedIn ads. Is it the emotional narrative? Is it a narrative that's talking about pain, agitation? Is it, kind of go through your category you have and then kind of look at the data high level and say, man, there's just way more engagement for this emotional narrative. We're seeing people actually react to it. Great. That's kind of the macro decision, strategic decision we need to make is let's double down on this type of narrative.
Exactly.
All right. I think we've exhausted this case study, gentlemen.
All right. This was fun.
Yeah, I think this was
Thanks,
good,
guys.
Well, all right. So I think we're gonna wrap up a little bit early since there are no questions. If anybody does have a question, if you're watching this later, feel free to reach out to any of us, Aaron, John, or me if you want to, and we'll be happy to chat. And join us next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.